We saw after 9/11 how fear can be used to sow division in our nation, as Sikh and Muslim Americans were targeted because of how they looked or how they worshiped. But we also saw what happens when so many Americans, in the spirit of our nation, stand in solidarity with all people and their fellow American, with those who experience violence and discrimination.
More perspectives on this subject. Let's speak now to Khaled Beydoun, a law professor at Wayne State University, and he joins me now live from Detroit, Michigan. Welcome to the program. My colleague there just said that 9/11 was very much the beginning of Muslim Americans always being treated with suspicion. How would you say 9/11 impacted Muslim Americans?
9/11 radically transformed life for Muslim Americans in a myriad of ways. Legally speaking, it introduced new policies that enabled unchecked and unfettered surveillance of Muslim life, obviously wiring of mosques and masajid, tracking of the travel of Muslim Americans, but also Muslim internationals, the tracking of money sent abroad from Muslims in the United States to Muslims abroad. Socially, culturally, expressions of Muslim identity, whether it be through religiosity, speaking of the Arabic language in public, any manifestations of anything that resembled Islam was policed and oftentimes punished by the state. So 9/11 entirely reshaped Muslim American life for the worse. And the residual impact still stands today. It's still an ongoing process where we see discrimination being a vital part of Muslim American life today.
Incredible. 20 years on, you say that it's still being felt. And beyond the US, how has this impacted the identity of Muslims abroad and also Islamophobia in general, would you say?
Well, it's critical to remember that the war on terror was always a global war on terror, and it was an amorphous war, meaning that it wasn't, specifically a war against Al-Qaeda or the Taliban, one sort of cogent entity. It was a war against an amorphous enemy, which was Islam, right? And I always say that the war on terror is better reframed as a war on Muslims. So, given that it was a global war, the United States was very swift in looking to enlist other governments to partake in this global war so that they can police and crack down on their own Muslim communities. And we see this happening in real time today in places like India, where a populist regime is really keen on persecuting 200 Muslim Indians living in India. We see it obviously happening in places like China, where there's a severe crackdown on Uyghur Muslim life. We see it happening even in the Muslim world. Where governments like that in Egypt, for instance, are cracking down on Muslim elements within that country. So the war on terror is a global war, and we see one of its most nefarious byproducts is Islamophobia, which is being spread and proliferating across the world.
And if I may just take you back to what Vice President Kamala Harris said a few hours ago, how straight after 9/11 we saw how fear struck Sikhs and Muslims, and of course they were targeted. But she said we also saw how people stood together in the face of a stranger. We saw a neighbor and a friend. What did you make of those remarks?
I haven't heard those remarks, but I think there's truth in those remarks. I think that this country, obviously, post 9/11, had experienced a very frightening, tide of Islamophobia and tide of xenophobia that was unleashed on communities beyond the Muslim community. However, there were also moments of solidarity and moments of humanity that I think are oftentimes lost and forgotten because we tend to focus on, sort of the bleak dimensions of tragedy and hate crimes and hate incidents. But the reality is, I think Vice President Harris is correct in saying that in some respects it brought the United States together, but I think that we can't forget, and we have to juxtapose with the really strident and discriminatory policies that came from the very top of government. So even though we have glimmers of solidarity and glimmers of hope coming from people, that does not negate, and that shouldn't help, that shouldn't push us to overlook the really horrific policies that came into play as a consequence of neoconservative brain trust that controlled the Bush administration, and then obviously dangerous policies that came from Obama and then Trump. The fact of the matter is that law, more than the popular actions of a small set of individuals, has a far greater effect on Muslim American life.
Khaled Beydoun, law professor at Wayne State University School of Law, thank you very much indeed. Great to get your perspective on this important day 20 years later after 9/11.